Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continue our Yuan Shu's Dynasty of Zhong Let's Talk Lore series with part 4 titled False Emperor of Zhong. So last time, we left off as Yuan Shu made his home within the Jiujiang Commandery in the Yang province after being chased out of the Yu province by Cao Cao's forces. But despite this setback, Yuan Shu managed to kill off the current prefect of the Yang province in Chenwen without much resistance, and even managed to secure an official imperial edict naming him as the new governor of the whole province. That includes Jiujiang, Lujiang, which are commanderies north of the Yangtze River, and Danyang, Wu, Yuzhang, and Kuaiji as 4 commanderies south of the Yangtze River. Of course, this edict from the imperial court, headed by Li Jue, is essentially a meaningless piece of paper during this chaotic period. But at the very least, Yuan Shu and his beaten down forces now had the official mandate to stay where they are. So they settled down within the Jiujiang commandery and made the bustling city of Shouchun their base of operation. Naturally, Yuan Shu wanted to exert his influence as the new governor of the entire province on the remaining 5 commanderies, but things didn't go his way. To his immediate west, Lujiang was governed by Lu Kang, a respected elder statesman with deep ties in the south, who saw neither Yuan Shu or the Li Jue-headed court as legitimate, and therefore did not heed to the commands of Yuan Shu. Farther south, in Yuzhang, which Liu Biao once again got into Yuan Shu's business, as he also appointed a competing administrator to the one appointed by Li Jue's court in an attempt to take over the commandery since it bordered the Jin province, and neither side had the upper hand here. So essentially, the commandery was in the hands of either murderous bandits that roamed the land or greedy gentry clans who held much of the land. Thankfully, Danyang and Wu both fell into line, as ties with the Sun and Wu clans helped bring these commanderies in, and it was only natural for Wu Jing, who was Sun Jian's brother-in-law, to take the helm as the administrator in Danyang, while Zhu Zhi, who was another old lieutenant of Sun Jian, took the same position in the Wu commandery. Lastly, in the southeast, Kuaiji also resented Yuan Shu, as it was headed by the famed scholar Wang Lang, who, like Lu Kang, also did not acknowledge Yuan Shu or Li Jue's claims on the region. But despite these initial resentments, neither Wang Lang or Lu Kang took up arms against Yuan Shu, and Yuan Shu was allowed to establish himself and recover from his earlier losses. And by the end of 194, his rank would be bolstered by Sun Ce, who had just finished observing his father's tomb guarding duties as he returned to serve under Yuan Shu, much like his father. And despite what romance would have you believe, Yuan Shu was very generous to Sun Jian's clan and officers. Certainly, when speaking of Sun Ce in particular, many will point to the fact that Yuan Shu went back on his initial promise to grant the position of the administrator of the Jiujiang commandery to Sun Ce after their war with Liu Bei in the southern parts of the Xu province to the east. Ultimately, after Yuan Shu managed to get a lucky victory against Liu Bei and seize Guangling, he went back on his initial promise and turned out to give the position to Chen Ji instead. But if we look at the big picture, this is not really a slight against Sun Ce or his clan, or at least in my view. As a matter of fact, I actually believe that it's probably a good thing and in Sun Ce's best interest for Yuan Shu to not grant him this title, for 2 good reasons. First off, Sun Ce was extremely young at this time, barely 19, and not even battle-tested. So granting him such a high position on the merits of his lineage will surely upset many others up and down the ranks. Secondly, and probably the most important part, is the fact that the Sun clan already owns way too much influence within Yuan Shu's court and territory, and it will actually put them in danger should Yuan Shu ever suspects anything. And I say this with a fair bit of confidence, as if we take a look at who Yuan Shu had appointed as administrators to run his four commanderies at this time. We already mentioned that Wu Jing, who is Sun Ce's uncle on his mother's side, runs Danyang. Zhu Zhi, who is a loyal officer to Sun Jian, runs Wu, which is where Sun Ce's clan's hometown resides in. And in the newly captured commandery of Guangling, which was won from Liu Bei after Lu Bu had backstabbed Liu Bei, granting the opportunity to Yuan Shu for the win, Yuan Shu appointed Sunbin, who was Sun Ce's cousin and another former officer of Sun Jian, who had actually fought to protect Sun Jian's body after the ambush that killed him, to become the new administrator there. So already, 75% of Yuan Shu's land are ran by someone close or related to Sun Ce. And if Sun Ce had been appointed as the administrator of Jiujiang, then everything that Yuan Shu owned would technically be owned by Sun Ce, who was now the de facto head of the Sun clan. So this was very much a risk, at least in terms of appearances. And if you remember the last time when Sun Jian was threatening Yuan Shu's glory and his appearance and ego, Yuan Shu cut off his food supplies during his campaign against Dong Zhuo. So there's really no telling what could happen to Sun Ce if he actually landed this position. Of course, the major split between these two finally came when Yuan Shu promised for a second time to award the position of the administrator of Lujiang to Sun Ce if Sun Ce can help them take the commandery from Lu Kang, after Lu Kang refused to supply Yuan Shu's army with food during their war with Liu Bei. Of course, Lu Kang had no obligation to supply Yuan Shu's army in an offensive war against another fellow governor in Liu Bei, who had taken over as the governor of the Xu province following Tao Qian's death. And despite the fact that Tao Qian essentially died fighting as Yuan Shu's ally against Cao Cao, Yuan Shu saw this transition of power as an opportunity to expand his territories. So while Liu Bei was picking up the pieces in the Xu province, and while Cao Cao was busy reclaiming his own land after being backstabbed by Cheng Gong and Lu Bu, Yuan Shu launched an attack on Xutai and Huaiying. But like most of Yuan Shu's campaigns where he was leading, his forces got bogged down as Liu Bei's forces arrived to defend the region. And it was during this prolonged fight that Yuan Shu showcased another one of his weaknesses, in that he is not only terrible at leading armies on the battlefield, but also terrible at managing commanderies, as much like how he was not able to accrue any supplies back in Nanyang and was forced out when Liu Biao cut him off, he was also not able to gather enough supplies in Shouchun either. So when the fighting against Liu Bei got tough, he tried to flex his governor power and turned to Lu Kang, who was sitting on a huge deposit of grain in Lujiang, for aid. But Lu Kang, who was already 70 at this time, ignored his request, but luckily for Yuan Shu, he got lucky, as Cao Cao had defeated Lu Bu and forced him to escape to Liu Bei, who took him in. But not long after, Lu Bu backstabbed Liu Bei and seized control of much of Xu province, which forced Liu Bei's forces in Guangling to abandon the commandery entirely in order to head back north to fight off Lu Bu. Thus, Yuan Shu scored his first victory. And with this newfound confidence, the vengeful Yuan Shu turned to Lu Kang as he unleashed the young tiger cub in Sun Ce upon him, hoping to get a result similar to Sun Jian. Unfortunately, Lu Kang proved to be quite the formidable foe for the young Sun Ce, as Lujiang held out for over 2 years before finally falling. This was obviously not the performance that Yuan Shu was expecting from the son of Sun Jian, so perhaps this was also the reason why, after Sun Ce had campaigned for 2 years and won, the reward of administrator once again fell to someone else, as Liu Xuan was named the administrator of Lujiang instead. But at the end of the day, this struggle actually helped Sun Ce, as Yuan Shu will underestimate him going forward. And when the control of Danyang was lost to Liu Yao, the newly appointed prefect for the Yang province, Sun Ce asked to head south on the advice of none other than Zhu Zhi, using the excuse that he wanted to aid his uncle Wu Jing to retake the commandery. And Yuan Shu agreed, thinking that Sun Ce would have no chance in the south, as he handed him only about 1,000 men and a handful of horses. But of course, we all know about Sun Ce's success in the south. And in case you didn't, please go check out our Sun Ce Let's Talk Lore series on the channel, as we will skip ahead to where Sun Ce had already blazed through Liu Yao's forces in Danyang, regained control of the commandery for his uncle Wu Jing, beat back Wang Lang in Kuaiji before forcing all the rebellious factions in the south, whether they're bandits or government forces, into Yuzhang, where Liu Biao's forces was also present. And this entire campaign took less than a year, as in 197, Yuan Shu is starting to feel a little too full of himself as he saw Sun Ce's victories all as his own. And looking at the map, Yuan Shu has indeed expanded his territories many folds since losing to Cao Cao in 194. He controlled firmly 5 of the 6 commanderies in the Yang province. The Guangling commandery in the Xu province is also under his control. And if we look north to the rest of the Xu province, Liu Bei, Cao Cao, and Lu Bu are in a standoff against one another. And while his old hunts in the Yu province to his direct north has been lost when he was chased out, he still had a lot of influence there, especially in the Runan commandery, which actually bordered his land, since that's where Yuan Shu's hometown is from. And the only real resistance he has on his borders is to the west in the Jin province, where Liu Biao was still strong, but stayed rather defensive. So if you compare this with what everyone else had at the time, Yuan Shu was indeed the strongest and largest warlord for that split second in time, as his brother Yuan Shao was still fighting against Gongsun Zan, while Cao Cao held very little land, despite landing the emperor earlier in the same year. But who cares about emperor when you have the imperial jade seal, and thus the mandate of heaven, or so Yuan Shu thought. And to make things more interesting, there was also going to be a traveling fortune teller from Henei named Zhang Jin, who shared a prophecy with Yuan Shu, telling him that his clan's genealogy links all the way back to the Zhou Dynasty thousands of years ago, when they were initially surnamed Chen, and it was the name given to their clan by the mythical Emperor Yao. And since his clan is linked directly to the Emperor Yao, who is often associated with the element of earth, it's only natural that his clan can succeed the Han, which is often associated with the fire element. And according to the Chinese 5 elements, fire gives way to earth. Therefore, Zhang Jin advised Yuan Shu to follow destiny by first changing the calendar name to Zhong Jia, which represented that he is second to the emperor, since Zhong is the word used for second. Now, for all of this to make sense, we do need to take a look at Chinese calendars for a second, as clearly no one back then knew it was the year 197 as we all refer to it now. How years worked back then is that the current emperor would pick 2-character name when they ascended the throne, and each year that would follow would be the 2nd year of that name, or the 3rd year of that name, and so on, to keep track how long the emperor has ruled. Now, of course, the emperor can change the name if he wishes, and the count would reset again, but the name usually signified something major that happened to the empire, and a fresh start was required. Regardless, Yuan Shu was clearly not qualified to name any calendars, but this is exactly why he's doing it, as it symbolized that he was starting his own counter for his upcoming rule. And the reason why he went with the character of Zhong Jia is because it essentially means the second clan, or the second most powerful, right after the current Emperor Liu Xie, who is going to continue to fade as the Han fire fades, and the earth element representing his clan will rise. So technically and historically speaking, Yuan Shu never crowned himself as an emperor, as it would not make sense while Liu Xie was still alive. But he went out of his way to act like an emperor, to display that he represented the future by naming calendars, building palaces, fielding hundreds of concubines to all aspects of his life. And he was essentially living like an emperor. But I repeat, despite what Romance of Three Kingdoms would have you believe, Yuan Shu never officially created a dynasty of Zhong, as no one is going to name their dynasty the second most powerful. But with the simple act of renaming calendars and creating palaces, everyone in the land knew Yuan Shu's intentions, and no one was going to let him get away with it. And with this, we'll end our episode here and come back next time to see how everything fell apart for Yuan Shu, as his Zhongjia calendar will only get to year 3 before ending tragically and rapidly. So hopefully you all enjoyed this episode, and see you all next time. Bye!